Welcome back, everybody. I want to take a look at the Great Depression and some of the ideas happening within the United States with the downturn of the economy and the advent of the common man. We've been taking a look at the Russian Revolution and how communism changed the mindset. It changed the way that people saw politics and the economics, at least within Russia. And then we're going to take a look at how this becomes more of a world concern, a kind of a global phenomenon. And I want to take a look at today at how we see similar seeds of elements that are beginning to emerge within the United States and how that's going to affect the art and propaganda in the U.S. Mainly what we're going to see is a questioning of the wealthy and capitalism within the U.S. and suggesting that maybe we need to have some type of reform and how that's going to then shift the way that we see the common man. But we've been talking about back to week two. We were examining the ideas of propaganda. We talked about the base and the superstructure and how the base is the economic system and the superstructure are the ideas that support the base, such as laws and family, education, any part of social conditioning that supports whatever the base is. And if you're in a capitalist society, generally you're going to have the laws, the rules that support capitalism. And so we have our own myths in the U.S. That support the ideas of valuing those that are the industrialists, that they're ingenuitive, that they're hardworking, that they're kind of the founders, the pioneers of the American spirit. And I want to take a look at two individuals that really stand out as part of this changing world, as we've talked about with industrialization, two tycoons that become really famous and become symbols of the American or the bourgeoisie dream, as we've been taking a look at people that have risen from poverty and obscurity to wealth and prominence. Let's take a look at Andrew Carnegie first. He was born in Scotland and he immigrated with his family to the U.S. And initially he worked in cotton and then for Western Union. And then in 1856, he opened his own steel company that was worth $480 million when he sold it to J.P. Morgan. And it's about $8 billion in today's currency. So someone that was an immigrant came to the U.S., didn't really have anything and penny to his name, worked in, kind of agrarian life, and then kind of as a clerk at Western Union. And then he, started his own business, and it suggests that this, the opportunities that are available to those who have initiative and who are working and whatnot. And then the other part of the myth that goes along with this is after he sells his company to J.P. Morgan, I think it was in the early 1900s, but don't quote me on that. He devoted the rest of his life to philanthropy. And he said, quote, that it's his moral obligation to give to charity. And so he felt that that society has given him so much that it's his now obligation to give back. And so what he does is he starts to develop libraries. And he spends about $56 million to develop about 2,500 libraries throughout the U.S., mainly in small towns that wouldn't have access to reading, wouldn't have access to books. And so he goes to these smaller towns and builds these libraries, and for the most part, they're still there. And if you live in Idaho, there's a Carnegie Library in Boise, one in Idaho Falls, one in Moscow, one in Pocatello. They kind of dot throughout the U.S. And in Utah, there's one in Salt Lake City, one in Lehigh, one in Murray, one in Ogden, right? So they're just kind of all over. And you can, if you live in the U.S., you can Google Carnegie Libraries, and you can find one that's near you. But the idea of Carnegie, kind of the myth that people latch onto as part of this, superstructure narrative of supporting capitalism is that you have these individuals who can rise up above their current economic class, become successful, right? This is the land of opportunity, the land of dreams and hopes. And so here's an immigrant that's able to do that. And then in addition to that, the other layer to that is that you have people, these industrialists want to give back, right? And so, I mean, these are all, elements of, these are all true points within his life. But then, of course, the myth or the legend that grows is that then everybody is kind of like that, right? And so then you have more and more kind of esteem that's given to these industrialists. Another one I wanted to talk about was J.D. Rockefeller, who also obtained wealth and prominence and was the wealthiest man in the world. And in fact, if you take a look at him in comparison to Bill Gates, his fortune, if you compare it to inflation, it's Bill Gates's pales in comparison to what J.D. Rockefeller was able to accomplish. He was born in Richford, New York, and his father was a farmer. He initially became a produce clerk at the local grocery store, and then he developed a company that grossed $450,000 in the first year. And so he uses kind of the skills that he learns, the hard work, determination, kind of business, kind of grit that he has. And then he takes that success and he turns to oil. And he developed Standard Oil in 1859 with the development of the locomotive, which is going to become extremely important. And then you have cars that are on the horizon here. And he bought plants in New York, Pittsburgh, and Philadelphia that totaled over $900 million in 1913. Then, much like Carnegie, he devotes the rest of his life after retirement to philanthropy. He gives 1/10 of his fortune to charity. He develops schools like Rockefeller University. He develops some other, gives to the arts throughout mainly the East Coast. And he set up as an organization to find places to give money. And if you take a look at his net worth today, I think he would be worth about $350 billion, something ridiculous like that. But as we take a look at these two individuals, they've become exemplars of people that have the industrial mind, that are being able to take a look at this industrialization, which is happening throughout the West, and being able to I don't want to say take advantage of it or exploit it, but they're able to use it to their advantage, right? So they're able to take the opportunities that they have, and so it becomes this kind of capitalist narrative of these individuals are not only hardworking and smart and ingenuitive, and they're directing society, and they're bringing jobs to people, which is all true. But they're also they have a philanthropic mindset that they're willing to give back, and so then it makes it seem like all industrialists have that mindset, and it promotes that idea of the American dream, right? The idea that people want to aspire to become better than their fathers, better than their grandfathers, to work their way up, and in some ways that's great, and it's wonderful to have more opportunities. But on the other side of that, right, as we take a look with a critical lens, we kind of pull that a little bit closer and examine it with a microscope, then it seems as though if America is the land of opportunity where the streets are paved with gold, if you don't, right, obtain the wealth and prominence and success, notoriety that's available to you, then it's as though that you're lazy or there's something wrong with you. And so then there's that double-edged sword that we can see within it. So we have to kind of take a look at, there are these opportunities, that's true, but is that an oversimplification? Is that to suggest that someone who is struggling in some urban area, does that mean that they're necessarily lazy? Does that mean that they're not hardworking, or what does that really mean? And we need to be cautious of oversimplifying the narrative, right? Because propaganda tends to oversimplify things. And what happens in the 1920s is you start to see a shift within that. You have all of these companies that are starting to take advantage of people due to, we talked about urbanization and the rising costs of the apartment complexes, but also then that causes the falling wages. And so you have strikes that are happening throughout the U.S., and this is on an extensive list But it's a list that shows, from all the way from the East Coast to the West Coast, these strikes that were happening to try to get better working conditions, and people were starting to question, much like they were questioning in the Soviet Union. We've seen strikes and people that were questioning the current prevailing system, trying to create change. We see similar movements that are happening in the U.S. and where communism was taking roots in Russia in the teens, 19 teens. We see communism starting to take root in the U.S. in the 1920s and the 1930s. People starting to question whether capitalism is actually working for everybody, if it's just working for a few. And kind of interesting, this image that I wanted to show you here is from a Ford Motor strike. And what happened was some people in Detroit were protesting against the 6-day work week, and they wanted better wages and less time on the job. And so they were picketing outside the Ford Motor Company there, either in Detroit or Ypsilanti. I don't remember which plant they were at, but Ford decides to, and this is in January, in kind of mid to late January. Ford decides to he calls the fire department up, and because, he's wealthy and prominent and influential, the fire department comes and he tells the fire department to turn the fire hoses on them, to have them disperse. That this is bad. The optics of them being, of picketing him and chanting and whatever else they were doing was causing disruption, so he wanted them to disperse. And so think about that, right? January in Detroit, Michigan's pretty cold and brutal in the winter, and so it's 20 degrees, maybe lower, and they're turning fire hoses on these people. And so again, the question within this is, are industrialists, right? Is it an oversimplification for industrialists to be these, wealthy pioneers that, are they always going to be altruistic? And that might be an oversimplification. They start questioning that in the 20s and the 30s. Here's another one. Even Disney had its own strikes. There are no strings attached to me. I like that little picket sign with Pinocchio on the picture of Pinocchio on there, and the woman carrying that. But the working conditions in California were not all that great, and so you had even Disney had its own problems with people pushing for reform and change, much like what we saw in Russia. I wanted to talk a little bit about the stock market crash. As most of you have probably taken a look at the stock market crash in the Great Depression, or maybe in your U.S. history class in high school. I'm not going to give you too much information on it because I don't really want to spend too much time on the historicity of it. I wanted to focus more on the effects of how that's going to shape art and propaganda. But this is just a picture of people flooding Wall Street on what is known as Black Thursday in 1929, when the stock market actually crashed. And what we see here is just this is a chart of the GNP of what happens of this kind of increasing wealth after World War I. You have people coming home; they have excess cash to give, and you have the Roaring Twenties, as it's called, this economic boom, and then in 1929 the stock market crashes. And so then the question is, well, how did that happen, right? What's causing this? And mainly what was causing this was people were buying on credit. And this is an advertisement. If you buy today, right, you can beat the price rise. And so buy today, pay tomorrow was kind of the mindset. And here's again some cars. Just kind of buy your car on credit. And so it's kind of an interesting representation here of just kind of, buying kind of on tomorrow, believing that the economy is going to be fine, and you'll always have your job, and everything will be great and wonderful. But what happens when you're buying on credit, as you guys probably have started to learn in your young lives, is that at some point the credit card that you have, or whatever credit or whatever loan you have, maxes out. And that's exactly what happened in the 1920s. As people were buying on credit, it was really good for the immediate economy of, the factories they were struggling to keep up with the increasing demand. But what happens when nobody's, can buy anything is that there's no more demand. And that's what you have with the stock market crash, is that that people could no longer buy anything, and that caused this spiraling downward effect of the economy. And this is just the rise of consumer debt in billions, where you can see the roaring 20s is kind of constantly moving upwards, people buying things. And again, that's the idea of consumerism. It's the idea of capitalism, is that we want to buy, we want to own, we want that private property. But then the question is, what happens when it can't go up anymore, right? We've seen elements of this more recently. In 2008, we saw that with the housing market boom, where housing prices just keep going up and up and up. Every year, you start wondering, where's the limit, where's the ceiling? And then we found the ceiling in 2008, when all of a sudden people couldn't buy houses anymore. They couldn't afford them, or they were getting into risky loans where they were only paying for they were only paying on the interest, and they weren't even touching the principal of their loans, and which was causing them to not pay down any of their loan, and so they just constantly had this debt hanging over their heads. Or they were buying loans that had a flexible rate rather than a fixed rate, a changeable rate, which changes with the market. And so sometimes it would be down at 4%, sometimes it would go up to 12%, or whatever the case may be. And that's a big difference when you're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars. That difference of a monthly payment is going to be huge, depending on what your interest rate is. And so people started losing their houses. And so we've seen that in 2008. We're starting to see it a little bit again now in 2020, with all of the businesses starting to shut down. We see that this is going to take a hit to jobs, and so there's some parallels that we can see that are similar to the Great Depression, that we can kind of now we can kind of see it, maybe understand it. We've kind of walked a little bit into the footsteps of our ancestors who lived through this to some extent. And this chart here just shows you the rising unemployment rate, where you can see it's kind of high. It's in between 12 or 10 and 15%, so around 12, 13%, and the late 1900s, and then it goes way down. And then the roaring 20s, it kind of stays around 5, 6, 7, 8%, whatever. And then in the 1929, 1930, you just have this huge spike where it's over 20% unemployment rate, and that's because when people aren't buying products and services, right? Then the industries start to shut down. They start to close the doors, and then people aren't employed. And we're definitely seeing that. We're definitely feeling that with the coronavirus right now. We can see similar effects of this. And so this is the Great Depression. People were out of jobs, and as a result of that, they couldn't afford their homes. And so this chart is just a chart of the foreclosures that were happening. And then this is the time frame, 1926 to 1945. It starts to stabilize due to World War II. But we can see throughout the 30s the tremendous amount of foreclosures that were happening, as people were not able to pay their mortgage payment. And so I want to talk about two different approaches that we see. Herbert Hoover was the president during the stock market crash. And he saw, the unemployment. He saw the massive foreclosures, and he just kind of saw the very beginning of it. But his mindset, right? He kind of has this capitalist mindset, this kind of absolute faith that the market will eventually correct itself. And so his mindset was what is known as laissez-faire, kind of this hands-off, where the government shouldn't regulate, that we can kind of trust businesses to kind of bounce back and eventually employ their people. And we see this argument today as well, as we start to think about the stimulus checks and how much responsibility should be within the hands of the business, and how much responsibility should be in the hands of the government. And Hoover's mindset was that it shouldn't really be in the hands of the government. It should be in the hands of the people, individuals, charities, local charities, or just the local communities and local businesses. And what happened as a result of this is you have the development of these little shanty towns, or called Hoovervilles. They named them after the president, as a kind of a derogatory term due to what they felt was him abandoning them in their hour of need. So you see these little shacks, these little ramshackles that are kind of popping up all over the United States, where they just, because they're out of a home, they don't have work, right? They need some type of a place to live. They just kind of put these cheaply constructed places up to live within their family quarters. And then you see people that were with a massive unemployment. There were these huge lines waiting out in front of the companies each day, hoping that they would be employed, and the company would go out, and someone, and human resources, I probably didn't have human resources at the time, but someone would come out and they would hand select this, we need 5 people or we need 10 people, whatever they needed for the day. They weren't really employing a lot of regular staff. They were just, everyone was kind of an at-will employer, just because there was such a huge supply of the workforce and not a lot of demand. And so that created more tension within the industry. And so you have a lot of people that were just out of work, waiting each day, hoping that they can get paid for that day, and then they can go and get something for their family to eat. And these two individuals are just advertising their willingness to work. I wanted to show you a song that was written in this time. It was written in the 1930s that expresses this frustration of, wanting to have a work, wanting to have the kind of the pride that comes with work. I mean, there's a certain level of dignity that comes with, working for your sustenance, working for your livelihood. But then that frustration of not being able to have that, right? And then the question is, whose responsibility is it? And so I wanted to take a look at the song, Brother, Can You Spare a Dime? That highlights a lot of the mindset that's happening during the 1930s with the Great Depression.
They used to tell me I was building a dream, and so I followed the mob. When there was earth to plow or guns to bear, I was always there, right on the job. They used to tell me I was building a dream, with peace and glory ahead. Why should I be standing in line, just waiting for bread? Once I built a railroad, I made it run, made it race against time. Once I built a railroad, now it's done. Brother, can you spare a dime? Once I built a tower up to the sun, brick and rivet and lime. Once I built a tower, now it's done. Brother, can you spare a dime? Once in khaki suit, gee, we look swell, full of that Yankee doodly-dum. 500,000 boots went slogging through hell, and I was the kid with the drum. Say, don't you remember, they called me Al. It was Al all the time. Why don't you remember, I'm your pal. Say, buddy, can you spare a dime? Once in khaki suit, ah, gee, we looked swell, full of that Yankee doodly-dum. 500,000 boots went slogging through hell, and I was the kid with the drum. Oh, say, don't you remember, they called me Al. It was Al all the time. Hey, don't you remember, I'm your pal. Buddy, can you spare a dime?
So what we see within that is this idea of humanizing those that are the working class, those that we would consider today essential employees or essential workers, trying to humanize them, suggesting that these are the people that the bedrock of America was built on. They were the ones that were building the skyscrapers in New York and throughout the U.S. These are the people that were on the front lines during World War One. These are the people that built the railroads, right? So the things that we rely on. And now the question is, they're in trouble. They're hurting. What are we going to do now? What can be done, right? So, and the question then, becomes, what should we do? Should the government really do anything? And so the discussion at the time, right, in the 1930s was, what's the role of the government, right? What's the role of the individual versus what is the role of the government in doing more? And so what we see is a similar type of movement happening in the Soviet Union, although not quite as extreme, but we do see some implementations of some socialist principles that were happening. And today, of course, it's, we take a look at some of these things and we hear the term socialism and we all freak out. But then the follow-up question is, well, what's the alternative? That's the alternative for the government to do nothing and to have people starve and to have people without work. What should we do? And the mindset of Roosevelt at the time was, maybe if we can put a paycheck in people's pockets, they wouldn't be so down on their luck, or at least feel so down on their luck. They can have that individual pride of being able to have a means of providing for their families. And maybe if we can put a little bit of money in their pockets, they can help to spark the economy and get it going again. And so it's a different mindset than what we see with Hoover and his hands-off government. He's suggesting maybe we can change the role of government. Maybe there should be what we call today in the U.S., we call it a safety net. Maybe there needs to be something that stops people from completely bottoming out and completely falling through the cracks of society. And so he develops an economic stimulus package. All right, so this New Deal kind of comes in different forms. The economic stimulus was to try to reduce the crop supply to stabilize prices, was one of them, the Agricultural Adjustment Act. And what that was is when price goes down, the farmers tend to then overproduce their crops, right? So if you are a farmer and you're producing corn and the price of corn bottoms out, there's a temptation to then produce more corn to make up for that difference because you have bills to pay, right? But what happens when you start to to pay or to grow more corn? Then the law of supply and demand, then the corn prices go down even further when you're flooding the market with corn. And so he's instead of doing that, they're just trying to regulate some of those prices, and we still have that today. We still have some regulations over prices and some government intervention on crops and whatnot to make sure that they don't get too outrageous or just kind of plummet. There's price controls on things like milk in order to make sure that people have the basic needs. And it really does start with FDR and this idea of what basic needs can we help society to really help meet. And I know that the mindset of kind of the hardcore capitalist mindset is you can't do this because otherwise people are going to become dependent on on the government or whatnot. And maybe to some extent we can see some people taking advantage of that. But then again, the question is, what's the alternative? Then starving in the streets, or not having anything, or what's that responsibility, right? And so that becomes really the question that's being at least addressed here. Then we have the National Industrial Recovery Act, which does price controls over collective bargaining, or the Indian Reorganization Act, which is returning land to Native Americans. But the other thing that I want to talk about is the banking reform. The banking reform was to try to oversee the closing of banks. And what happens with the banks, or what was happening with the banks, is when people started panicking about the stock market crashing, they would then flood to their local bank and they would then withdraw the money. The problem with that is it's not as though you go and put $2,000 in the bank. That bank is going to just keep your $2,000 in some secret vault or something just for you, right? Or your community is having all of that money. What banks do is they take the money that you're putting in your savings account and they're reinvesting it into loans, they're reinvesting it into mortgages, they're turning it back to society, and so they don't necessarily have the money. And what happens when you have a mass group of people that are coming to collect their money all at the same time, the banks don't have the money to give to them, and then they start to close. And we see these runs, how quickly these runs can happen. They call it a run on a bank. We can see how quickly this happens with supplies being depleted. We've certainly seen this over the last several months with supplies such as hand sanitizer, toilet paper, right? Basic supplies, canned goods, things like that. They're pretty quick to just completely be gone within a matter of moments. It doesn't take that long, right? And so you've seen that happening with banks as well, as people trying to get their money out and they just didn't have it. And so he's trying to stop that from happening, because once the banks close, then companies in town, the businesses in town, can't make their payroll, right? Because they're using the bank to then pay their employees. And if they don't have the money to pay the employees, the business is shut down. So everything comes to a screeching halt. Everything becomes in gridlock. And so it's not a productive environment to be in. And so he's trying to stabilize the banks. He invents or develops the FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, which most banks are going to be federally insured, and this dates back to here, which ensures banks to make sure that, if they fail, that they have some type of insurance to kind of come back on it to prop them up a little bit. And then the Security Exchange Act, which is regulating trading, so there's no insider trading and some of the shenanigans that goes on in Wall Street to try to stop some of that corruption. And then there's the Relief and Welfare Acts, which is trying to provide aid to states so they don't go quote unquote bankrupt. And we hear that term today, states going bankrupt in 2020. And there's a question of whether they can actually go bankrupt. But again, can they make payroll? Can they pay for the basic needs and services of police, fire departments, roads, things like that they need to actually stay in business? And then the Federal Surplus Commodities Corporation, which is to distribute food to the needy so people don't go hungry, right? So we think about, the United States as one of the it's the wealthiest nation in the world. Should the wealthiest nation in the world have people that are starving to death, right? And so then we think about, what is the responsibility? How can we change that? What kind of community are we living in? What kind of community can we think about? Rather than, focusing on the individual, this is mine and my kind of private property, we start to see the shift to, more of their community, which we see similar ideas happening in the Soviet Union. I don't want to, make that connection too heavy-handedly, just to kind of see there are some themes, there's some elements that are happening here in the United States, focusing on, this idea of community, this shift to focusing on, more government regulation and whatnot to help out. And then New Public Works Administration, which is giving work to the unemployed. This, ranged from anything from people going out to count trees in the forest to, helping with roads and build bridges and whatnot. But the idea, again, is to try to create the stimulus in order to put people back at work. And then they also help the art, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later this semester, but they start funding things like theater, they start funding things like artists to just kind of create art, to create a culture, right? And so we see that